In this video, we will have a look how to install a new Windows server in the virtualized environment. What I'm using is the VMware Workstation Pro, and I'm using the 15.5 edition. Pretty much all the editions have the similar or identical interface. First thing first, I went to the file and add new virtual machine. I would select typical and go next. Then I could either give the ISO path directly, but in my opinion, I would want to keep the settings later. I go to the next. If I know the operating system, then fair enough. Otherwise, I could simply go to other and then select the things manually. Today, we are installing Windows Server 2016. So I went to the Microsoft Windows and selected the option Windows Server 2016. I go to the next and I get the option to select the name of the machine and the path where I would want to store the machine, and then I would want to allocate the machine size for the storage. Typically, I would say 60 GB or more than 60 GB should be fine. You could, however, be smart on selecting the file size based on either selecting store virtual disk as a single file or the multiple files. I'm a big fan of multiple files because if you go for a single file, probably it would not be very much efficient. You then go to the next, and then you could go to the finish menu, or you could simply go to the customize the hardware environment, and there you could select things up. So the first thing I would want to select is the memory size. I think for server environment, 2 GB, more than 2 GB should be fine. 4 gig is just fine. Regarding the processors, I would say number of processors 2, and number of cores per processor should be 2. I have a pretty decent sizing on the hardware I'm using, so I should be fine with the 2 plus 2. You then have the network adapter. This is where some things go a little bit difficult to manage because the network setting is something not very straightforward for everybody. By default, you have only one option to go with an add option, but I recommend that you probably would want to add more than one network adapters. I'll tell you the reason why. So imagine you have the base computer operating system. I would want to draw it here. So this is the environment that you have in your computer, and you are trying to set up a virtual machine. There are few things that you have. First of all, you have the internet, which is then somehow connected to your laptop or your machines where you are installing the VMware on or the virtual machines on. Within this laptop, you are now having multiple network interfaces. You have the Wi-Fi, which gets the connectivity to the internet. You then have probably you have the LAN port, RJ45, where you could get the connectivity to the local switch or to the local router. So this is probably the two main interfaces that you have. Now you're installing or trying to install the virtual machine on this laptop where you have the VMware station installed here. Now, if you have the NAT option, which I showed you before, which is this, NAT means the computer or the virtual machine, if you will somehow connect through the netted environment to the internet. So there will be in VMware Workstation, you have a little bit of routing and switching. Let's say routing, there is a mini router inside which somehow connects to anything which has connectivity to outside network or to the internet. So if you select on NAT, your machine will be able to get the internet through the netting. This, however, will not give you access to RDP into the machine. So I cannot open uh, the MSTSC, or I cannot open a remote desktop to log in into this PC. So if I have remote desktop, I have no way to log into this machine. There are few solutions or few workarounds to this problem. One of the workaround could be that you add another network interface. So one is netted, fair enough. This will connect to the internet. You then add another interface into this machine. This interface I would refer to as the secondary LAN card. Now this LAN card you could bind to the network port so that if somebody from, let's say this is somebody on the same network, if somebody would want to remote desktop into this PC, could be should be able to remote desktop into it through this LAN port, because this LAN port has somehow been mapped or bridged to the separate network interface that you have. On this interface, you could set up an IP address and then somebody could log into it. Similarly, you yourself could open the RDP application, and from this computer, you can open a remote desktop and you can log into this machine directly. In order to have this feature available, you have to have this network port up and running all the time. Because if you do not have a cable connected, then this LAN card, essentially virtual LAN card, will be down and you will no longer be able to ping it or RDP into it. I have a solution to this problem as well. The solution to this problem is that you create an interface and then you bind it to the loopback instead of binding it to the LAN card. Instead of binding it to the LAN card that you have, or let's suppose you have no switch, no nothing, you have no connectivity whatsoever, you're not connecting anywhere, you are simply having a laptop. On the laptop, you have the VMware installed, and on the VMware software, you have the virtual machine running. In that scenario, you would not bind it to the LAN card. Instead, you would create a loopback interface on your laptop, which I refer to as the loopback 0, let's say. And then you connect to loopback 0 interface. This way, whatever IP address you have set up on the machine interface, you set up similar IP on the loopback, and your loopback will be always up. Allow me to show you something. ncpa.cpl, this is the command to get to the network connections. So now I go to the network connections. You would realize that I have something called the Microsoft KM Test Loopback. This is a loopback. Typically, my RJ45 is not always connected. My Wi-Fi is connected, but I don't want to connect things to my Wi-Fi. I don't want to mess up anything with the network setting of the Wi-Fi. So usually, both of these are something which I don't want to touch or don't want to go nearby. So what I've done is I have installed a loopback. I can say test loopback or loopback. There is a video to how to add a loopback on your computer. When I do have the loopback, I would simply give it an IP address range. Let's say I have 99999. So this is the IP address range which I could use to log into anything. So what I'll do is in this LAN card, I will set up the IP address 9.9.9 dot something. So if I assign this IP on this virtual machine, then I could always remote desktop from my PC to this virtual machine from anywhere, anytime. Cool. Let's get going and go to the VMware's back and see how things can be done. So what I'll do is I'll go to the LAN segment and I'll say, sorry, customized, and I'll say I would want to map it to my VMnet number one or VMnet number 19, let's say. Please bear in mind when you do have the VMnet, a specific VMnet setup, you have to have this VMnet working fine and bind to your loopback. How you can do that? You could go to virtual network editor settings in your laptop. Let me open it for you. So when you have a virtual network setup, you would go to a specific VMnet and bind it to one of your loopback interfaces. For example, let's say VMnet 19. If I go to change settings, this need elevation. So once I grant the elevation access, I would want to check that VM19. So this is already set up, but just to show you, VM19 has been bridged to my KM test loopback adapter. If I go to the network connections, so if you see the device name, loopback is basically Microsoft KM test loopback adapter. So a specific VM will be binded to Microsoft test loopback adapter, and then I hit OK. In this case, your machine is now somehow connected to Microsoft. If you select 19, it's now connected to loopback adapter. But if I go back to my initial thoughts, I told you you would need two LAN cards. So one, you would need to go to the NAT, network address translation. That is needed because your machine would need the internet access. So what we will do is we'll add network adapter. We say network adapter, finish, cool. So this is now called network adapter 2. So network adapter 1 should be connected to VM19. Network adapter 2 could be connected to NAT. I keep it NAT because this I have no concerns. This can simply go to connect to the internet and get hold of the network reachability through the Wi-Fi or internet or whichever platform you have. You say okay, and then your machine is ready to spin. Once you go to the machines, you can power on the machine and Remaining steps I would be showing right here. So when you set up the CD or DVD, here you have to give the path to the evaluation version or whichever ISO format that you have for your Windows Server 2016. I went to the Microsoft website, I downloaded the latest ISO image for the Microsoft server, and then I installed it here. I downloaded the ISO. Microsoft gives you an opportunity to download it for 90 days, I guess, and then you can rearm it for another 90 days. So you have in total 180 days to to use it without worrying about anything. So once you play the machine, you check up everything is just fine, and you simply hit OK to start the machine. Once you start the machine, you have to provide the right, let's say, ISO format. So the moment you boot it, once you boot up, this will end up showing you the Microsoft logo. At this moment, you probably can sit back and relax because it will go through some of the steps. You select the language as usual, go to the next, install now. I pick up any ISO format for the sake of showing you the or demonstrating you the installation processes. Setup is starting. This is where you need to be slightly paying a lot of attention. If you go for a typical evaluation version, it probably will not have the graphical user interface. So you have to select that workstation, Microsoft server for the workstation. By default, nothing will be there. So all 60 GBs are for you to play with. You say I would want to create a new partition, then you will have a partition of around 59.4 GB size. Go next and go follow through the steps of the installation. Now, this is slightly a pre-recorded session so that I don't end up in things which are stuck in here and there. Also, I have the opportunity to move fast track, so I'll just go slightly fast track so that I forward. So once the files are ready for installation, you then end up with the features and the update, just like you are installing it from the scratch over the CD environment. You go to the it will couple of times it will ask you to the restart option. Once you give the restart, it will end up booting with the server environment. Now please remember our conversation about the network setup. So we have already set up two network ports, but when you log into the machine, you will have both network adapters, but you have to manually assign the IP address to the lower. Remember, this one will connect to the NAT over the HCP. This is just fine. But for this interface, you have to manually assign the IP address. Okay. Once I'll go fast track, you provide the username, and for the administrator by default, a specific username is already created with the name administrator. You put the password or you select the password for the administrator. Make sure you don't forget it. Once you log in, you have the opportunity to first log in through the VMware by clicking onto it. But later on, when you will set up the IP address, you can always remote desktop into it. So first thing first, I would want to go to the network settings. Here I selected the network interface which I would want to connect to the internet. So if you have a look, it basically it has picked up the DHCP IP address, which is the IP address of my computer leaving to the internet, and the second one is the LAN card interface which I would want to set up the IP to. So if you have a look, I simply set up the I gave the name NAT because I would want to memorize it, that this is the interface which is connecting to the internet. And for the second one, which I do not want to connect to the internet, I will rename it as something which is, let's say, loopback. And the only job of the loopback adapter would be to make remote desktop sessions into it. I will also provide a little bit of details about the IP address so that it's recognizable. Then the last thing is I would want to give another loop network interface, another IP address, which I would want to use it for later purposes. The last thing is you have to somehow allow the inbound connections, because if you want to ping it from outside world or if you want to remote desktop into it, you have to enable the ping at least because you want to check the reachability. So if you go to the files and printer sharing option, by default it's probably not enabled. If you enable this rule, your ping will be enabled. So from the outside world, you will be able to ping this machine. If I can go back to my artwork from this laptop or from anywhere outside, you can at least ping this machine through this IP address 9.9.9.x. Okay. You then move forward and try to check the options here and there. Once you have set up everything, you can simply go to the machine and put up the IP address 9.9.9 or something so that you can get into it. In my environment, I have set up a machine IP 11.11.11.11, and the moment I get into this machine, I can end up into the machine with this IP address. Okay, and I can show you what I have set up here in cpa.cpl. In this machine, I have several network interfaces. This is another one which I recorded before. So here what I have done is I have selected a particular LAN card, which I would always want to use to access from the outside wall. So if I can go to the properties of it, I consider this as a loopback and I give an IP address 11.11.11.11 so that if you see now from outside wall, I can always remote desktop into it through 11.11.11.11. And this is my PC. The test loopback adapter has properties. If I go to properties, I have the 11 networks assigned into it, not here. On RJ45, I have added 11 network so that I can always RDP into the 11 network subnets because I'm in my scenario, I typically would want to connect from the outside world. So if I give an IP address of 11.11.11 here, on the other computer where I'm logged into, my RJ45 should have the same IP address range 11.11.11 dot something. Okay, so this was the very brief demo about how to create a virtual machine in a virtual environment, and then how to RDB into that machine from outside world or from inside world. I hope this has been informative and you got the basic idea how to install a virtual machine on the basic VMware environment. Thank you very much.